Hello, everyone. It's good to see you today. How are you doing? We are over halfway through the term, so I am just knowing this is a really stressful point. And I hope that if you can just keep the same rhythm going here as we're coming to the end, it's all going to flow together and we're going to make it. I am enjoying our team meetings. Thank you so much for your conversations and the thoughtful, provoking examples you're all bringing in. I really enjoy listening to everyone's perspective. And this time you had to create questions to stump the professor. So I'm working on that right now. Taking notes on your questions, and I'll make a special video for that coming up. This week is about analyzing conflicts and conflict mapping, two important tools. And we are really at a point now where I've given you a lot of tools for your toolbox. We've talked a lot about goals and interests, the nature of conflict, really understanding how scarce resources or incompatible goals and how we need to think about our ability to adapt to conversations and move towards managing differences, which is our conflicts. Even when it's going really well and we're in a collaboration, we are now recognizing that's also a type of conflict, even if it's transformative in the fact that we are collaborating, meaning that everyone is in a win-win place. Oh, last week we were talking about the different ways that we each are approaching conflict and how we're managing conflict as we're going forward. I think it's important also to keep bringing this vocabulary forward as we go through the class, because we are learning as we're managing conflict. We want to carry that toolbox with us as we go from situation to situation and be able to adapt and adjust in there. So how we can de-escalate a conflict, how can we self-regulate our emotions, and understanding that some people are using win-win or other types of terminology as a way to still be in a win-lose situation. They're just know how to use the language to kind of manipulate the conversation in their direction and really starting to signal the difference between what does it really mean to be in a situation where everybody is involved and the situation where someone's saying, I just want a win-win, and then demanding their way. And there's a difference in that. So I'm really hoping your ear is starting to fine tune into those, which is why I love listening to those team meetings, because I can hear the way that you all are actually changing your perspective. That Godfather video that we analyzed at the beginning, the opening scene, I might bring that up a couple times here, and I think it's going to come up again in the class. So if you feel still a little bit lost on that, I think you can just, I didn't realize the video I had posted didn't have closed captions. And boy, that opening scene is, with all the great acting, it's got a lot of difficult tone and rhythms for us to tune our ear if we're not used to it. So I will say that you can easily find one with captions if you just Google that on YouTube. All right, so let's talk about this week in analyzing conflicts. We have this idea of a conflict map. Maybe I'll start with conflict mapping first. So a conflict map is not a brainstorming map. This is different. It's where we're going to create bubbles that represent different parties in our conflict. And then what we're going to do is we're going to find ways to be able to kind of get into an omniscient place where we can see the relationship of all the parties in the map. Here's in its most basic, if party A and party B, you know, of all, and then maybe there's a third party C. We want to look at the way that a map is drawn to show the relationship. Oh, we even have party D here. And these circles are to represent the relationship of power to the other people. So this A that has a small circle, we could actually put an arrow either outwards if we feel like they grew in power, or we could bring it down if we saw that they lost power. Party B has more power, but then there's outside influences, and that could be public opinion, that could be laws or process that we have to follow, that could be money and profits, things like that. And then we might see relationships, the way one line is represented, two lines meaning alliance, uh, one line, but then there is a break, meaning that they used to be allies, but then, and then there was a break in that relationship. And the main conflict here is between A and B, represented by a zigzag line. And then this party here, uh, D for doorbell or donuts, we can see that, oh, this party hardly has any power. They're very small, but they have a good relationship with A and a good relationship with B. And the purpose of the map is because these can get pretty complicated, is to look where there is alliances so that maybe we can find a bridge for a way to create a dialogue. So that is one of the reasons we do that. This one is a really old map I've made before in the past for Cascade Locks, because my PhD is about Nestle Water Bottling Company and the state of Oregon, and we have the Warm Springs Tribe and treaty rights down here, seed lands. We have Mount Hood County here, ballot measures, city councils, all of these things I was trying to represent. And I'm showing where there's alliances or influences on others. And since I'm writing a dissertation on this as a conflict analysis, which we're doing this week, conflict analysis, you can see that these maps can get pretty complicated and have different kind of pieces. So this other one came from a map. I just found an image from a program that helps people create maps. Here's another kind of one that I did to show outside forces and different relationships. And so conflict mapping is another way to analyze a conflict. And I will put up some examples when we come to you'll have to do, not this week, but next week, your teams will get a video and you'll have to create your map with your team. And so trying to go back and look at those and try and understand them, we want to get you in the mindset of conflict mapping and what the function of that is. We've also done conflict analysis. I've already introduced one conflict analysis tool, and that was the progress triangle from week 1, developed by Walker and Daniels. And that is to create a triangle, and the 3 points represent different ways to deconstruct the conflict. And I had that image of the iceberg to really show context and history and relationships, and how they're kind of influencing it, and how the triangle is trying to pull apart the complexity of a conflict. And that's what we're really trying to do. We're trying to understand the complexity of conflict, especially when we're looking at more than 2 parties. And this does not have to necessarily be an organizational conflict or a business conflict or a societal issue or warring nations, though these really more complicated tools often are for when we're trying to deconstruct really big, complicated conflicts. You can use this in a family conflict as well. You could, maybe has been some elders in the family that passed away, and there's this issue of inheritance and all the different kind of siblings and family and expectations about how we're going to deal with this inheritance, and that becomes really painful conflicts for a lot of families. So that would be another reason to use a conflict map to kind of see the relationship of everybody as you're trying to analyze what's really going on here. Another way to use it for yourself in your own everyday life is I've had people do this, is to use it in their workplace when they feel overwhelmed by workplace conflicts with coworkers and being a supervisor or a subordinate and trying to manage the conflict. They might create their own map to just kind of pull their mind into that omniscient place of, I need to analyze this. And so we can move forward, or I can see where there are allies or where things have actually come apart in the relationship or the situation. So that's a couple of suggestions of how this can show up in your interpersonal interactions, to remember that we are focused on interpersonal conflicts in this class, even though we might be, these tools are often used in the political world or in negotiations, and mediators use these tools when we're looking at more complex nation to nation mediations, or organizations with unions and administrative relationships. This is another way that these more complex tools start to come in. But I want as many things in your hands as possible, especially now that we're halfway through the term. So that's conflict mapping. Once we start going into conflict analysis, we are using the Hawker and Wilmot textbook in our class, and I posted the chapter, and I even posted in our vocabulary page the way Hawker and Wilmot breaks out each section of analyzing a conflict for all their points. And that's because of this idea of complexity. So let's just talk about the word complexity for a little bit and understanding the difference. I know these words are words we use in our regular vernacular, but when we're in a particular field of study, we need to, again, adapt the definition of those words so that they become the jargon of terms that we're using to show our more advanced understanding of these topics. So complexity is this idea of the unknown, that there is something that we have never seen before, which is almost every moment. Just to be completely honest, we have a lot of patterns where we see maybe you see the same conflict come up again and again and again. But the truth is, every time you step into a conflict or a relationship, that is a brand new situation, completely unique, which is why understanding your listening skills, understanding how intercultural communication is impacting, and being able to have empathy, cognitive complexity, and adaptability as your primary skills is because of the uniqueness of each situation. However, sometimes we get faced with a conflict we have not seen repeatedly happen. It could be with a coworker, when we have changing roles on our jobs. It could be in a romantic relationship. Maybe something's going to come up, or with a roommate that we completely feel, there's the word blindsided, which is a popular word to say for complexity. Basically, when we use the word complexity in conflict management, we're talking about something we've never seen before. Something was unexpected. Something is unknown. Now, it's going to pull us into a feeling of chaos at first. So we might have that fight, flight, or freeze reaction as we try to assess the situation. What's really happening here? I don't really get it. What's going on? And we might be asking a lot of questions. We might be trying to talk and explain, well, this is what I think is going on. And when we're in that defining role, we're pulling up into complexity from chaos to try and sort out what is known and what is unknown. And as we're sorting it out, the complexity of it, it might just be, oh, actually, I do know what's going on now that I'm getting more information. And actually, I do know the best practices, right? That's what the word term best practices is about, is when we are up against a situation where we do understand and know what is happening. And so we're going to say, oh, ding, there's a rule for this, there's a law for this, there's a process for this. Let's follow best practices and go right into that. But sometimes even that doesn't work because every situation is unique. So we want to be able to use our knowledge of past experiences to help us sort out what's happening, but we can't always rely on our own ability to understand things. And that's why we need to consult others who maybe have had this experience before, or we need to, if no one's ever had this experience before, we need to move into a place of basically testing the situation to find the solution that's going to work. Now, if you are an avoider of conflict or you're dealing with an avoider, there's just going to be this retraction and there might even be a buildup. And you can't necessarily force someone to deal with a situation unless, so we want to, in our interpersonal encounters, so if you're dealing with an avoider, you're going to have to find those steps to pull them into the conversation in a way that they can feel safe or included. That might be setting those expectations or those norms that we've talked about in the past before. And it's how we show up as a listener. Uh, but if we push too hard or we demand too hard for someone to be involved in the conflict, we could end up with that stonewalling. We could end up with a runner, right? Someone who's going to exit the situation. We also could end up with attack. If we really force someone in there, we could end up with an attack back at us. And mostly when someone is feeling forced into a situation, the attack could not even deal with whatever the conflict is. It could come as criticism against us as whatever it is. Somehow those people know how to directly find our one point that is going to really pull us into a flooded state almost immediately with an attack on our personality or our culture or something about our person. Those are really painful experiences. So this is why we really want to move into conflict in those ways, or to analyze the situation so we can move into that complexity in a testing place, a place of, well, this is what I think is going on. Do we think this could be the solution, right? Like, I think this is what's going on. Here's the solution. Let's try this. But this may not work, right? And we have to be willing to make a mistake in ways that is as least harm as possible. And then go back and say, okay, we need to test again. That didn't work. And you're kind of in this loop of testing and trying things and retesting and trying things until you find the one thing. Because if this is unknown, then that means we need to be ready to explore, to be curious, to listen, to ask questions. And when you're working with a group of people who are willing to do this, that is collaborating on a situation or a problem towards motion of finding what is the solution for this unexpected experience. So complexity, do we feel like we understand what that is now? That is the situation of we're moving beyond the surface of a conflict. We understand this may not fit any experience we've had before. And then we want to work with others so that we can unravel and deconstruct to problem solve how we're going to deal with the conflict. And that means moving in and out of testing, like a hypothesis testing solutions. Did that work? And go back again and again. It's like a little mini science experiment. Okay. This is why this week we have Hawker and Wilmot's uh, and we have Hawker and Wilmot's conflict analysis framework we're working with, and why we also want to work with Daniels and Walker's progress triangle, or we're going to use Paul Weir's conflict mapping model. And this is why when we're dealing with a complex conflict that feels unknown, we need to use tools to pull us into a place where we can analyze it. So let's look at Hawker and Wilmot's Analyzing Conflict Framework. There are 8 different areas that I have put up in our vocabulary section of our Canvas page from Hawker and Wilmot that starts with just understanding the foundation of the conflict. And when you look through these, it says attitudes and perceptions, it says metaphors, it says culture and gender. And you're like, boom, wow, I already know that. You should already, at this point in the term, be able to look at some of these things and say, oh, we have talked about biases and perceptions. We've talked about language and metaphors, and we even talked about language with emotions. But we've got to the metaphor part earlier in the term. And I talked about individualism and collectivism, which was our Godfather video. For those of the teams that got into individualism and collectivism, yay, I was cheering you on. That is really what we're looking for in Bonsanera's request to the Godfather, and to the Godfather, who is more collective culture. So we have this individual culture versus collective culture. And that is really what I really like, that scene, the opening scene of The Godfather. And I like showing it because you don't need to have seen the whole movie to understand just the premise of diving into the language of that. That we have Bolsonaro, who is come to America to be a part of the melting pot, that he has assimilated his family and he's raised his daughter in this American tradition. And yet when he comes up to this place where he needs help, he was unable to find justice. And so he's going to the Godfather to seek the justice he couldn't find in the American court system. And so the Godfather is like, why didn't you come to me first? Why don't you ever invite me over for coffee? And my wife is godmother to your only daughter, and you have abandoned your culture. You've abandoned the collective culture. And this point of the way they go back and forth is punctuated in that moment when Bolsonaro says, how much should I pay you? Because in the individual culture, money is often used as a channel of communication in order to show, oh, I want to show my respect for you and pay you. But in the way the Godfather hears it, which is incredibly insulting, which is why the Godfather gets up and he says, what have I ever done for you to show me so much disrespect? Right? That he hears, how much should I pay you, as an issue of power. That if Bolsonaro pays the Godfather, then the Godfather works for Bolsonaro. So the exchange of money, he feels, goes against that collective culture of how we show up and help each other and paying each other So they have a lot of miscommunication happening, and it's right here at the very beginning of Hawker and Wilmot's analyzing conflict to look at the way the culture is impacting that conversation. And the truth is, almost all of us are in an intercultural encounter, even me and my mom who raised me. And I talk a lot like my mom, which is probably why you have me on double speed because she talks really slow. I've adopted this slow talker. I apologize for that, for being a slow talker. However, we still end up in intercultural issues because of our generational gap, that she was raised in a different time period where how she talks is much more contextual than the way I was raised, which is much more low context. And when I was a teenager, we used to really butt heads on high context versus low context ways that we speak to each other. So this brings us into the second point of Hawker and Wilmot, the nature of conflict, which is identifying specific characteristics that get us to the definition of the conflict. And remember when I talked about collaboration, and even compromise, it's really about how you're defining the conflict. When both parties are defining the conflict the same way, you have a much better chance of moving towards a solution. For example, in a workplace, maybe you have a supervisor who has an issue, or a coworker that has an issue with the way that you're doing your work. Maybe you work remotely and they don't, and that's causing an issue. Their definition of the conflict is that of the way you're working remotely, and how can I contact you? Like, they've got this whole thing, and you've got a different conflict where you feel like you're being personally attacked, and you feel are in more of an identity. I need to be recognized that I have certain jobs that are different than yours. And when I work from home, I'm less interrupted. I'm actually able to focus and get into workflow and get my job done. Okay, those are two very different conflicts. And if a mediator comes in, uh, we need to understand the nature of the conflict, meaning we need to understand what has happened. We need to go through all those minutia of moments of defining the trigger points or the history, and where is the incompatibility, how are these two people interdependent on each other. And once we get through that kind of history and defining, we're understanding better the nature of the conflict. So then when we move to goals, we know that we need to start pulling people into the same goal. We need to address certain things so we can get to the point that can be negotiated. And so you can see how the Hawker and Wilmot analyzing conflict framework is really trying to pull you step through step of analyzing the different situations. So going back to Godfather's goal is to not be Bolsonaro's boss, to maintain his position of power, and to take care of the collective, the community. He wants this collective culture that retains the traditions of the cultural traditions from where they came from. Even in the melting pot of America, he feels like very protective of the community and the collective piece of it. Where Bolsonaro has a totally different goal. He wants justice. He just wants justice. My daughter has had this attack, and I need justice. I need to have payment for this injury that happened to my family. So how do we get back on the same page, right? Well, Godfather definitely keeps the power. So that's the next thing on Hawker and Wilmot's, the power. So let's talk about power for a minute as well. Ooh. We've been talking about power a lot through the whole term, but I'm going to give Hofstede's definition of power. Greet Hofstede. He's the same person who did our individualism and collectivism. he says that there is high power distance and low power distance. That means that power distance is an integral part of how we approach a situation. So here's the definition. Hofstede says, it's the power is whether people accept, whether you're high power or low power. Okay, so power, sorry, I'm just stumbling through the definition because I'm doing it off the top of my head here. Power distance is the way people of a group or a society accept that some people will have more privilege than other people. So it's basically, do you accept that some people have a different set of rules, a different set of laws, a different set of privileges than other people in the group? If you say yes, you are a high power distance culture, where if you say no, you're on a gradation to low power, saying that people in positions of power, we're going to squash it a little. They should be transparent. They should be accountable to the same rules, the same laws as other people in the group. And that the person who has power is in a temporary position of power, that they can be removed from power and someone else can be moved in. And low power people see that positions of power should have mobility, and anyone from the group should have access to that position if they are qualified for it. So there is this idea. It's not just like anyone can do it, but you should have qualifications and then be moved into that position of power. So you are a high power distance person if you say that people who hold positions of power should have a different set of rules than the other people in the group. Now, here's a couple of things about that. First, you might be more high power distance in one situation and more low power distance in another situation. You could slide, and that's what adaptability is, right? When we talked about that as a communication competence skill, this ability to understand the difference of context or situations. So maybe you're someone who's been in the military or in a workplace situation where there was much more power distance structure to that group, and that was okay. And when we say it's okay, when we're high power distance, we say because the person who has the position of power should not be answerable to the group. They should have different rules. They should have different laws. And the reasoning usually circles back to safety or economic prosperity. Like, how do we expect this company to succeed if the CEO is always having to be answerable to everyone? No, they should make more money. They should have I shouldn't be able to just go ask them any question I want, because they are working on the vision for the company and making sure I still have a job and I don't have to be laid off. So stop bothering the CEO or the CFO. That would be what you might say is a high power distance person in a high power distance culture when you don't have the power. If you are more low power, in a high power structure, you are going to be much more concerned about the accountability and responsibility of the people who hold power. They should be answerable to the group. They should be answerable to stockholders or to a union. And the structure of the organization should be they should be responsible and accountable to the group. And they should not be able to break the law, things like this. And the truth is, low power sees that also as a way that we keep the whole group safe, is by the accountability of the people in power. So even though they're both coming up with the same rhetorical points, they just their perception of how to get to their place is different. So if you've had a parent, if you grew up in a home where there was a parental structure or family structure that was very high power distance, you probably didn't have any way to question the authority of the power of the family, whether that was parents or elders in the family, whatever the structure was. So whether you had to go to a religious service or not, or whether you got to go out late at night or go to a friend's house, how much was the authority of the parents was, I say yes, I say no, and that's it. It's not like low power. If you're in a low power distance family, there's going to be, oh, you want to go do this? Tell me about that. There starts to become a dialogue with a family that has more low power structure. High power structures are, nope, you can't go. Why can't I go? Oh, because I said so, right? Because I said so is a great high power distance parental tactic. And again, low power thinks they're on their way to safety. High power thinks they're on their way to safety. You'll have to tell me how it worked out, depending on the structure of your home, of whether that worked in the advantage or disadvantage of the structure of the house and the safety of the house. If you are roommates with someone who had more high power distance structure and you're with a roommate who's more low power distance, you might be getting really frustrated in, hey, these are the rules, and the rules say this, and the rules say we always keep the front door locked no matter what, and we keep the back door locked no matter what, and you keep leaving it unlocked, right? That feels like you're putting the whole place in danger, whatever the conflict is. That's one I think I've heard come up in my classes before. Low power is going to be like, well, let's talk about that. Why are you not feeling safe? It seems like we're okay, right? There's going to be, and you're going to be like, no, the rule is, we already agreed to it. It's the rule. Boom, the end. So if you understand how people are coming at conversations from these culture groups, then you can see some of the conflicts are just about what is the hierarchy and what are the rules of that hierarchy, or is there more solidarity and we should be more in a place where we're going to have meetings or check-ins or huddles, whatever is the word used, to make sure that we're being transparent and we are talking through a situation. High power is not interested in that. In fact, my class has a lot of low power elements to it when in the way that it's structured, and sometimes in classrooms that if I have a high power student, they become frustrated with my more low power structure class. So low power doesn't say there isn't an authority. It doesn't say that there isn't someone in charge. It's just saying that there should be accountability and transparency about the way things were made. So let's go back to Godfather and Bolsonaro. So Godfather is obviously very high power distance, and Bolsonaro is coming at it with a little low power distance, and that we are equals. We're both about the same age. We both are wealthy men. We both come from the same country, but Godfather is still like, you don't even call me, you don't call me friend, but you don't call me Godfather. These are, and then the end when he kisses his hand is really conforming to that more high power distance structure there. In fact, the fact that you can't even visit the Godfather very often, in the room are his two other sons, his adopted son, who's the family lawyer, and his eldest son, who's going to take over the business, are in the room when Bolsonaro is trying to talk to the Godfather. And that means that that's very high power distance, that there's these barriers of people become barriers as well to have access to the Godfather. And the Godfather brings it up. It's the day of my daughter's wedding, which it's okay that the Bolsonaro is coming in and doing a request for the cultural tradition. The Godfather has a line of people outside the door that are coming in to see him, but the fact that he is insulting him on this very special day, instead of saying, can I do you a favor, right? As soon as Bolsonaro agrees for the favor, Bolsonaro is now the one in debt, and that combined with the kissing of the ring really establishes the hierarchy and power dynamics of that relationship, the way the Godfather wants. Don Corleone. Yes, I love that story. Love that movie so much. All right. So as we go down, there's styles and tactics, and these are the individual ways that we approach conflict and manage conflict. We talked about that with the TKI model, and I really went into depth in that video about how to approach as an individual and how to perceive things differently. We're in the assessment right now. This is it. When we use these conflict tools and the progress triangle, we are assessing the conflict, and we want to be able to identify patterns. We want to be able to identify triangles and micro events and the tone of the conflict. And these are the ways that we're assessing the situation. Other things that come up with the Hawker and Wilmot personal intervention and attempted solutions, I'm kind of talking about in this video, but we're going to get more into third parties and face work and face saving and identity in conflicts that are going to help us solidify the final parts. And I'm also want to make sure that one of the last things we're going to cover in the class is about forgiveness versus reconciliation, and really being able to hold an understanding of the difference of what it means to forgive someone and what does it mean to reconcile the relationship, because some relationships are not reconcilable, but we might always want to move towards forgiveness. And we're going to talk about that as one of the last modules. We'll cover new information. Okay, so I feel like I covered quite a bit in this video. I hope it was helpful for you. And I'm really looking forward for us to slide into the end of the term here. You have a couple more team meetings, a few more of those worksheets. Good job, everyone. Just make it through. You're in the marathon here. And then we'll complete the end of the term. It's going to work out well. And I'm really hoping that you walk away with the term with a lot of tools that can hopefully you can apply in your life. So I will talk to you all soon. Stay well and take care of yourself and others. Bye.